Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we are continuing our ongoing coverage of the Russia-Ukrainian war. And as I speak, there have been a series of major Russian cruise missile attacks all across Ukraine within the last 24 hours. Specifically, one of the largest attacks since the war occurred within the vicinity of Kiev. More than 40 cruise missiles hit the city or were shot down en route to the city of Kiev. I got to tell you, the Ukrainians are reporting that they shoot down a large majority of these cruise missiles. So, in the instance of the attack on Kiev itself, the Ukrainian authorities are claiming that of the 40 cruise missiles, 37 were shot down by Ukrainian forces. Now, how do you verify that? Well, you can't. And obviously, perception becomes reality for some. And as we watch this war, as you watch the media side of the war, you would think that from the propaganda coming from the Ukrainian side, that the Ukrainian air defenses are even stronger now than they were at the start of the war. Is that possible? Doubtful. Yes, they have received a lot of Western assistance. Obviously, they have the help of the intelligence from the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, from the United States. They can see real time the inbound weapon systems and the inbound cruise missiles, ballistic missiles that are being fired by Russia into Ukraine with the help of the United States and its allies. Now, does it have the capability to shoot down all these systems as they are reporting? Probably not. So we have to take what the Ukrainians are probably reporting in terms of shooting down all these cruise missiles with a grain of salt. We just really don't know. But we do know that the issue with the Ukrainians able to turn on the light and power in Ukraine is continuing to be degraded. Day by day, the Russians are turning out the lights inside of Ukraine. We've also heard reports, and this is from the Ukrainians, that the Russians are preparing for a major offensive, probably towards Kiev, within the January to March time frame. Look, that's a month to 3 months away. So the likelihood of that happening, a successful offensive operation by the Russians towards Kiev, I would say at this point, is rather remote. Now, we are hearing interesting things coming out of Belarus. We're hearing that there is a mobilization underway in Belarus. We continue to hear about the deployment of Russian forces into Belarus itself. And what appears to be shaping up is a multi-tiered offensive. So we think what the Russians may be planning is an operation from the Bryansk Oblast into Chernihiv Oblast, running down the Dnieper River. That would give the Russians two options. One, it would create a new front, and the Russians really need a new front in this war to disperse some of these Ukrainian forces that have compiled themselves in the eastern Donbass areas near Zaporizhia, and then obviously along the Dnieper River itself. And the reality, most of the major fighting right now is very, very focused in two areas. One, just east of the Dnieper River, Zaporizhia, and then obviously the areas in the Donbass, Luhansk, Donetsk, Bakhmut, Avdiivka, and other areas that run from Donetsk all the way up towards north of Lysychansk. So the Russians really need to open up a new spectrum within this war. And again, in all probability, we could see a major operation by the Russians, probably focused towards Chernihiv. And again, that would give the Russians the option of moving down the Dnieper River, north to south, while at the same time, if they are able to successfully penetrate the Ukrainian border, seize control of Chernihiv, continue on down, that would also give them the ability to mass forces near Kiev and shell Kiev from the eastern bank of the Dnieper River. And that's to shell Kiev with 150 to 130, 122 millimeter howitzers and other systems as well that they can't necessarily hit Kiev with at the present time. Most of the options for Russia to hit Kiev is with long-range cruise missiles and ballistic missiles at this point, and some of the more longer-ranged rocket system. Even those are out. Kiev is kind of out of the range of some of those systems. Not the cruise missiles and the semi-ballistic missiles, however. So again, that is probably what the Russians are doing. We're hearing that up to 200,000 Russian troops, over 1,000 tanks, are taking part in these preparations for this major offensive operation. Now, as I talked about a tiered system, it could come in an attack that starts in January, where we see the Russians move south from Chernihiv and then stop, reposition, and then launch another attack, another offensive operation, probably in the late summer time frame, or summer, late summer. I have a feeling that pressure by the Ukrainians in the east are causing the Russians to try and push up its timetable for further operations, again, to try and draw some of these Ukrainian forces elsewhere. Now, will this Russian offensive operation in the direction from Bryansk down to Chernihiv be successful immediately? Difficult to say. But again, I believe that the initial operation by the Russians, it would be designed to draw those forces away from the Donbass towards Chernihiv to alleviate some of the pressure, especially the possibility of a Ukrainian counteroffensive towards Melitopol. Again, as I talked about before, the Ukrainian seizure of Melitopol could be the nail in the coffin for the war for the Russians, if that happens. And I think that's why we're starting to see the Russians react and take action to prevent that from happening. And one way it could do that, again, is to launch a major offensive towards Chernihiv, and it could also look like an offensive towards Kiev. And if we do have a Russian breakthrough, that would position Russian forces very close to Kiev. And then obviously, once the winter goes by and we see the defrosting take place, obviously it could be difficult for the Russians to continue offensive operations given the terrain and the muddy terrain that we've seen in Ukraine. But then again, back in July, August, things tend to dry up, and then it's open again for the Russians to mount part two of this operation that could take place in the direction of Chernihiv. So I hope that makes sense. I hope that gives some clarity. It's what the Ukrainians are talking about, at least. But again, the early launch point of this offensive probably is because of the pressure that the Ukrainians are putting on the Russians. Now, is that a wise decision by the Russians to launch their offensive operation early? Well, maybe, maybe not. But at this point, it looks like they may not have a choice because the Ukrainians right now, at least in some areas, are controlling the clock, the tempo of this conflict, especially with what could happen in Zaporizhia. Now, again, there's a high likelihood, okay, that even if the Ukrainians launch this offensive without the Russian diversion in the north, that given the Russian force density near Zaporizhia, and the redeployment of Russian forces from Kherson to Zaporizhia to meet this possible Ukrainian offensive. It's highly likely that the Ukrainian offensive could fail onto that. But if it doesn't fail, and the Ukrainians break through and end up taking Melitopol, that's going to be tough for the Russians. Really tough to come back from that, namely because of the supply situation that it's going to create. It's going to put these forces in Kherson in jeopardy. It's going to do a host of things. It's going to have a domino effect. A domino effect unlike what we saw in Kharkov or the western bank of Kherson. I hope that makes sense. But that's probably why we're seeing what we're seeing in Belarus and near Bryansk and other areas as we hear about these reports of the buildup of Russian forces possibly preparing for a major offensive into Ukraine from the north in the direction of Kiev. But again, today, major cruise missile, semi-ballistic missile strikes all across Ukraine. Essentially, the power is out, the lights are out, the heat is out, and that's going to have an effect on the Ukrainian population as this continues, especially if we go into year 2 and we see the same sort of thing next year. It's going to wear on the Ukrainian population. It just is. It's going to wear on Western Europe, and again, the possibility of escalation, meaning a direct war between the North Atlantic Treaty Organization and Russia is omnipresent. It could happen at some point. And it's increasing. It's not decreasing. And then we also have to look at other areas of the world as well. Look, Russia is not going to sit idle in terms of creating problems for Western states, the United States namely. There's other areas in the world that the Russians can focus on to cause problems for the United States. And you have to believe, absolutely, the Russians are preparing for that as well. They have to. They believe they are at war with the West by proxy. And many could argue that that is the case by what's happening on the ground in Ukraine in terms of the assistance that the United States and the West is providing to the Ukrainians. But that does it for today. We'll continue to monitor, report, and bring you more content for your consumption. Thank you for joining us today. Have a good day.